All right. I'm not going to say a lot in terms of introduction because I think it's more important that we hear quickly from the projects and get a chance to have a conversation. So we have three presentations that we're going to go for about 15 minutes each. Our first project is on the idea of work integrated learning from our colleagues at Arizona State University. So I will turn it over to you all. I don't know who's starting for you.
There it is.
Excellent. Sorry, it took a minute. Technical problems in getting in.
I've already introduced you, so you're ready to go.
Excellent. Just give me 1 minute.
Okay.
So colleagues, I'm absolutely delighted to be presenting the work that we are doing at Arizona State University. I'll share a presentation, and then Dr. Muth and myself will walk you through the work that we are doing. ASU's charter, I think it's a useful reminder to everybody as to what ASU is focused on. ASU's charter inspires the work that we are doing at Arizona State University. And the key here is that the university is committed to this notion of that will be measured not by whom it excludes, but by whom it includes and how they succeed. And that notion guides our approach towards student success and our design of the programs, as well as you'll notice our tactics and strategies as we are deploying them as part of this effort on Work Plus Learn. So in the little bit of the context in which this work is taking place, I am Dean of University College, in addition to being the Vice Provost for Academic Innovation for the university. And one of the charge I have from our President and the Provost is to rethink the design of University College. There we are designing for three specific goals. We design personalized learning experiences to end achievement disparities. We design for an integrated work and learning future. And we design services to support learners at scale by using design thinking, analytics, automation, and intelligent systems. And many of the student services, particularly for undergraduate students, live within University College. And you will see the Work Plus Learn efforts that we are engaged in are deeply connected with our goal on designing for an integrated work and learning future. The design principles that we deploy in our efforts is learners first, be bold, simplify, personalize, and collaborate radically. We are in this together, and this conference is a great example of this work. We have learned a lot from our colleagues who are doing some very unique things across system in very different settings, and we are deploying some of those ideas and those notions at Arizona State University. The form might look different, but you will see similarities in the sort of alignment in the efforts overall. Pardon me. So within this notion of thinking about an integrated work and learning future, just a little bit of sort of two data points here. We know that 70% of ASU's undergraduates work at some time during their undergraduate journey. And secondly, we know from our research that we have done on our students who work that their sort of connection and relationship with their supervisor makes a tremendous difference in how they experience their learning, as well as on their academic success. So both of those things you'll see play out in the work that we are doing. Now, CLTE was generous enough to give us funding for running a pilot for work integrated learning, and we'll take a deeper dive into their work. But there are three bodies of work that we are moving forward simultaneously. One is called Work Plus, which is a redesign of all our student work. Secondly, work integrated learning, bringing micro projects from the industry and directly embedding them in the context of a class, and thereby creating opportunities for all our students. I think here equity, this is an equity-minded approach for giving students this applied experience in the context of class, where they get a chance to connect with an employer under the guidance of a faculty member and experiential learning network. Now, it's useful to tell you where we are at different these projects. Work Plus, we ran a pilot last year with about 400 students in University College to just iterate and build prototypes and think about how to design an approach for launching it at an institutional scale. Work integrated learning, similarly a pilot that we have been running over the last year and a half, finally scaled up to a large enough size with about 30 courses. And again, grateful for the funding there. An experiential learning network is in very early stages. So we have just conceptualized it, and a lot of connection between what we want to do here and the work that you just saw from our colleagues. So I'll be reaching out to them and talking with them about what their lessons learned and applying them here. Just a little bit more in terms of thinking. So Work Plus empowers students to engage meaningfully with their work. We employ about 10,000 student workers at ASU. So we have a huge sort of footprint where we can improve the experience of a large number of students. In addition to the 10,000 students, I think we have about 4,000 graduate assistants and graduate research assistants, etc. So in this context, there are some very distinct things that we are doing with our students. We are creating this Work Plus pathway where students are able to move forward in structured, self-paced way through a series of learning experiences. We help them craft their story. So again, this idea of who am I? What am I doing? How are these experiences connected? How do I get to tell my story better, and in this process discover the purpose? And they earn digital credentials, badges, as they accomplish various things along that journey. And we piloted this work. It is getting launched October 1st week at an institutional scale, but it is designed with a very open architecture in mind. Again, supervisors, as I mentioned earlier, the data is very clear on their impact. The Gallup study itself reinforces the idea of a connection. But we are also trying to redesign how do you supervise students in this context. So helping, and in many cases, supervisors, for many of them, this is their first supervisory role when it comes to supervising students in at least our setting. So their professional development, building a community for them, and helping them rethink the design of the work. So that is a key area of focus. The project is designed for scaling, and you can participate in it in a variety of ways. So there are a series of activities that take place. There's this idea of a community where you can sort of participate in workshop and conferences and weekly things. There is a student-driven piece where students can choose to participate, because we are not only designing for the students who work for ASU, but also who are working externally. And then there is this idea of Work Plus Team, where a department can take a deep dive and really redesign the work that they are doing. So again, open network, different ways of participating, designed so that people can, inside and outside, participate at ASU. Pardon me, I think I'm jumping along a little bit here. There we go. Our other key project is the Experiential Learning Network. Here, our goal is to connect the hundreds of experiential learning activities that are taking place at ASU, to curate them and to make them available to our students in a way where they can easily connect what they are interested in with their learning plans and degree plans. And again, this work is just beginning. During the COVID times, we used many of the student workers who didn't have much to do on campus and had them create a map for us. This work is just beginning, and part of our effort here is also to create an experiential learning transcript, and a lot of, again, thinking that needs to take place in this case. The third project, this was a project that was funded, is Work Integrated Learning Project. Again, we are using virtual project-based work integrated problems and integrating them into the curriculum, into the classroom. Sort of key set of things. The key thing here is we use a platform called Ripen. And Ripen allows us to scale really this idea of matchmaking, what faculty are interested in doing in their classes with what an employer is doing in terms of a work project. We've tested it overall in about 50 courses, 180 some projects, more than 3,000 students, 100% match rate between what faculty are interested in and what students are interested in. We created about 400,000 hours. of experiential learning. A goal is to get to about 1 million hours of experiential learning activities. And again, here, I think it would be really important to hear from my colleague, Ryan Muth, who's actually doing this work in his classroom. Dr. Muth.
Yeah, so I teach the computer science and computer systems engineering capstone classes. And what these are is a 2-semester sequence that the students take during their senior year. They focus on the professional transition from the academic life to the professional world, whether that is industry or if it's grad school or something else entirely. In the capstone program, this is not the entire enrollment for our major, but in the capstone classes, we have about 700 students that take this class each academic year. Big pushes during the fall, less in the spring. So our project need, we want teams of 4 or 5, and we want every single student to experience an industry, real world project, and sort of help develop those skills that make them marketable for their careers. So we need about 160 projects. I actually have 172 currently running this fall right now. The way that I used to source these things, I took over this program in 2016, and what I inherited was a spreadsheet of email addresses, and I would just blast everyone with them saying, please send us your projects. I would use LinkedIn, I would use the Career Development Office and Career Services, beg my family, friends, and faculty for new contacts and projects, and I had a very low response rate. I didn't have a lot of people that were interested, and mostly it was like cold calling, right? So you can imagine that it's very slow to develop these relationships. Retention was good, so when we did get a project or a contact, we were able to maintain that year on year most of the time, but it wasn't matching my enrollment increases. Enter Ripen, if you want to go to the next slide. And things change drastically, because what happens with Ripen is they're marketing to people that have projects and matching us with universities that need projects. So now they're doing the work of getting out there, finding companies that need things done that are nice to haves, not need to haves, that match well with skill development, that match well with things like that. They post them on their website. They're in all kinds of industries. I'm looking at the ones that are computer science related, the ones that are computer systems engineering related. And now I can search companies, make initial contact, start those projects, track them throughout the semester, and see how well it's going, right? It's a great platform for making that connection, which was really the part that I'm spending the most time on, and didn't have a great response rate. Since fall 2020, when I started using Ripen, I've sourced 71 projects from them, 37 projects in fall 20 in this semester, which is the most that I've been able to do. And right now I've got 179 total students that have been involved in Ripen projects over the years. And it turns out it works really, really well. Some of the examples on the next slide include one company is currently, this is a long-term relationship we've been able to develop since the very first time in 2020, is a company called Shore Buddies. They make sustainable stuffed animals, and they needed an application to go in with them to tell the story of like what the animal's character is and how it's evolved and things like that. A new project we're working on right now is with a company called Bitspace Development out of Canada, and they are working on edge computer vision inference. So they're using small embedded devices to do machine learning processing and computer vision processing for a variety of applications. And my students are working on these, and it's the students love these projects. They are great matches, and it's really helped me grow the program and maintain a body of projects that I can let my students choose and interact with.
Thank you, Ryan. What I'll do is stop sharing at this stage. So as you would see here, fantastic work being done by faculty colleagues across the university. The approach of taking projects that are coming from employers and embedding them directly in the classroom. We are testing it out last year in almost all colleges across the university. and the reaction from the faculty members is very positive thus far. So it allows us to scale this work, but quite excited by it. So again, from ASU's side, 3 different work streams, one focused on redesign of student work on campus, as well as helping students connect whatever work they're doing on campus or externally with their learning plans. Secondly, work integrated learning. And lastly, very nascent, very early stages, the ideas around experiential learning network. How do you connect students with a variety of experiential learning that is taking place on campus? And Archie, we are really happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you all. Yeah, sorry.
And I have 2 of my colleagues on the call as well, Brandy Papadin-Smith and Scott Travis, who are leading the work around Work Plus, and they can engage in answering the questions as well.
Well, thank you all very much for that really engaging work that's happening on at Arizona State. I'll open up for questions if anybody has any. We're a small group, so feel free to just chime on in. I guess I have one question then about kind of Work Plus. You mentioned these 3 different tiers, and I was kind of curious about the team's departments aspect. I was just a little bit, can you provide a little bit more information about how that works and how does that differ more specifically?
Yeah, and I think, Archie, conceptually what we are trying to do is really remove barriers for people to say yes. And the reaction we are getting thus far, because we're pitching these ideas on campus right now, is incredibly positive. I mean, we're having meetings with deans and department head, and the reaction is, yes, this is something we want to do. So glad these assets are available and we would like to engage. But we've designed this as a network, or an open network, where you can engage with these ideas at different level. You can attend the annual conference, you can attend the lectures, and that's about, if that's all you want to do, fantastic. But at that level, even at that level, it's a benefit that is available to students. The other end of it is deep engagement, which is the team's work, where you are committing to actually rethinking the position description, where there's active engagement, where very different kind of mentoring is taking place. So it's happening across a fairly different, fairly sort of wide spectrum of engagement. Brandy, I wonder if you want to add anything to the mix.
I would simply add that the Work Plus teams really allows us to engage with the supervisors and actually address the ecosystem, if you will, of the work experience. There is certainly the avenue for a student who their supervisor may not, or their department might not be engaged. Plenty of resource, plenty of support directly for that student. The Work Plus teams allows us to then actually bring the supervisors and the leadership for those departments into the fold. So we really are addressing in a very holistic and complete way the work experience for the student towards the goal of helping them see how much benefit they're getting out of it, and how they apply that work experience to future interests and future goals they may have.
Excellent. Emily, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and come off mute to ask your question, or you all can read it in the chat as well.
Sure. Yeah. So I was just wondering if there was any reflection component, and I want to apologize on that slide that had a lot of the components, but I just wasn't able to digest like everything on there. So I'm sorry if I missed something, but I was interested in basically if there was any reflection component and what that looked like.
Great question. So yes, within the Work Plus effort, there is certainly a focus on storytelling and reflection. It is foundational to that effort. And we have designed learning modules, etc., that help and guide students through the storytelling process. We give them opportunities to reflect, as well, deploying an e-portfolio for capturing that and facilitating that process. And then pairing of students also, where because of our design, we're designing for very different levels of engagement of academic departments. So if your supervisor is, for example, not interested and is not facilitating this process, then how can you pair with other student and in some way support each other through these reflective practices?
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And maybe for our last question, Dr. Buzz, do you want to come on and say yours?
Sure. Yes, I apologize. I'm shoving lunch in as quickly as possible in between all these things. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about integration with other units. Specifically, I was thinking about career services or whatever you call that at ASU, HR, I'm curious about your platform. We have an e-portfolio platform that we use in honors for specifically for reflection, badging, those sorts of things that's also available campus-wide. But I'd really like to hear sort of how permeated, I guess, this is across the campus.
And before
Go
you
ahead,
answer, sorry, can you try to give a very, very brief answer, because we're going to try to stay on time. We will have time to follow up on the breakouts. You can give a teaser answer, maybe, is the way to think about it.
Sure thing. Dr. Butts, deep engagement with our career and professional development services. The unit Work Plus Learn has been only recently established, about maybe 4 months old, when we hired Brandy, who was a director in our career services, to lead that effort. So again, there's very clear engagement within a variety of units. And again, to Archie's point, we'll come back and answer detailed questions as we go along.
So again, I always hate to cut off a great conversation, but thank you all, Arizona State, for your really wonderful presentation. So next, I'm going to turn it over to the University of Virginia, who's going to talk about their project, which is focused on nurturing sustainable, relation-rich academic environments.
Hello, welcome to this particular presentation. My name is Dorothy Bach, and I'm the Associate Director at the Center for Teaching Excellence at the University of Virginia. And I'm here with my colleague, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Mandeltorp, where I'm an Assistant Director at the University of Virginia, also in the Center for Teaching Excellence with my colleague, Dorothy.
So we want to start out by saying thank you to Tom Katsouleas, who we've heard from today already, and to Archie Holmes, our moderator, because they, when they were at UVA in their particular roles, involved us in helping think about ways that UVA could actually move into the direction of providing more transformational educational experiences that we are talking about here. And as a center for teaching, we are, of course, uniquely situated and differently than most of you at this conference, in that we are already talking with faculty around life, around significant learning experiences, and also more broadly about their relationship with students. So, and working with faculty on teaching issue also means that we have a unique insight into the realities on the ground and the pressures that faculty experience in tenure track positions, and also increasingly working with a group of contingent faculty that are focusing particularly around teaching. So to give you a little bit of context, where we started out. So we are aware that UVA has a long-standing conversation about advising. And more recently, we've become really serious about wanting to disrupt our systems of inequality that deprive Black, Indigenous, and students of color, along with other marginalized groups of students, from feeling that they belong at the university. So our starting point was also that UVA has a variety of initiatives already to address these challenges. Some are well established and others were more recently created. And our project, instead of trying to create support for faculty immediately to be better at what they're already doing, we really wanted to understand what's already happening in this landscape of existing projects, and understand how intentional are they in helping students develop agency, identity, and purpose, and how do leaders of particular initiatives, as well as individual faculty, understand this work, and what opportunities and challenges do they experience. In other words, instead of creating another initiative, we wanted to be planful and conscientious when supporting efforts to build stronger relationships between faculty and students. So the first part of the project was around researching the landscape. And this is where we are starting and where we also will finish, to just share with you some of the findings. So our research questions were: what models exist on our campus for prompting meaningful conversations between faculty and students? How intentional are they about fostering interactions that help students develop identity, agency, and purpose? What personal characteristics, skills, and support do individual instructors need to be effective in that space? And what are the structural supports and barriers to creating a culture in which everyone understands that supportive relationships are central to learning and growth of students?
Thanks, Kathy. I'll take it from here. So we hope that many of you have had a chance to look at the summary of our research findings that's linked on the program. And if you haven't yet, don't worry, it will be there for you to go back to after the session, and we'll have a chance to talk more. So here we want to present kind of the highlights of the research to open up the conversation. We hope to talk with you about how our findings might confirm, contradict, or otherwise relate to your experiences in your particular institutional context. So we hope to start that conversation, and at the end of the session, maybe continue it in the breakout session at 3 o'clock, or hopefully close to 3 o'clock. So a brief sense of our study methods and some examples of what we heard from our study participants. Let's see. So our initial data collection was pretty much of two types. We had a collection of interviews and focus groups. So first, we conducted 9 in-depth interviews with directors of programs that support student-faculty relationships, such as mentoring programs, faculty awards programs, and advising courses, courses with advising built into them. Secondly, we conducted a couple of focus groups with 10 faculty who have a reputation for having outstanding kind of connections with students and building relationships and mentoring them. So broadly speaking, we're looking for how these programs and the individual faculty currently foster thriving in our students, as we've all been talking about for the last day and a half. So we started by looking at those 3 interconnected elements that the coalition, this group, has been describing: agency, purpose, identity, in whichever order you like to say them. And then to really operationalize them, we crossed them with some principles from our colleagues, Peter Felton and Leo Lambert from Elon University, describing 4 principles that guide effective programs and generative cultures for, quote, building relationship-rich educational environments. So we start with these identity, agency, and purpose, and you'll see this nice overlap to operationalize those through how we create this with the exploring questions related to meaning and purpose, communicating genuine welcome and care, inspiring academic engagement, and helping develop webs of significant relationships, those interconnections that we keep talking about. And so we included Felton and Lambert's principles here because they describe the conditions for the work of developing this agency, purpose, and identity. So for example, to foster agency, institutions have to be intentional about helping students develop that web of relationships so they can feel different ways to connect and act on and feel empowered to move forward. To help students find purpose and sense of self, faculty and staff really first have to communicate genuine welcome and care. So these elements showed up in our participants' comments in the many contextualized and overlapping ways you can imagine. So we'll share a few examples of how we coded our interviews and the focus groups as we comb through those transcripts. So I will start with first the interviews with our program directors. And just to paint that picture a little bit, these program directors included faculty and staff or staff who administer programs that support student thriving via relationships. So I will read these in the interest of folks who might be communicating with us over their phones today and can't see the screen. So Program A director said that they do a lot of outreach on the front end. I talk to their parents, and usually if I can, I have my peer advisors attend to share about their experiences. Once they get here, the students, we have a big welcoming ceremony where all of the peer advisors are introduced again, and faculty and staff from across the institution are present, creating a space where we say, we love you, we're here to support you, trying to make sure people feel like they have a place where they can land. So this is direct from the director. And so we coded this as being an indication of communicating genuine welcome and care. You can really feel the love, specifically saying, we love you, we're here to support you, and that welcoming welcome to our environment, and overlapping with other elements as well. Another example from a program director here, quote, Some students seem really open to the first gen identity as a point of pride and something where they can almost be like an activist in the university community around that. And others, I think, would very much just prefer to blend into the woodwork. We just leave that space there. So this is the director of a program that supports first generation students. And quite clearly, we can code this as connected to identity and sense of self. And students may or may not identify as having the label of first generation connected with them. And finally, one more quote, I have the luxury of getting to spend a lot of time with students, which many advisors do not. So I really set aside time to hear their story, to understand the nuances of what they're experiencing, and to help them in a coaching manner come up with their own solutions and their own kinds of next action steps. And so we coded this as agency, that this particular person is helping the students develop their own ability to move forward. And so you can see other elements in here too that you might add for coding. So what else do I want to say about this? So this is agency building, but we would also probably indicate welcome and care here because this person has set aside a lot of time and is kind of directing the students and doing this one-on-one kind of work. So that's an example of the overlap we might see. So from these interviews, one of the main takeaways we have is that most of these relationship-oriented programs do intentionally communicate genuine welcome and care. And you can find out more of those kinds of results in our larger summary document that's linked on the conference website. I'll move on to the focus groups, a little taste of those. And the focus groups really gave us more information about these individual kinds of characteristics because these involve faculty describing what it takes for them to engage in this work. So 10 faculty across ranks and programs. These conversations were rich with descriptions of successes and challenges for student relationships. And while there are many unique individual characteristics that faculty pointed to as supporting their work, the conversations universally centered on this assumption of caring and relationship building as central to the work of being an educator. So there's this perception of the understanding, though, that varies depending on the formal and informal statuses that those faculty held, as well as the cultures. So faculty universally communicated this central idea of care for their students, that relationships are central to their work, but the perception of how all that unfolds depends on the nature of their kind of positionality within the university. So faculty in high status positions had largely positive perceptions of the ways that relational work was supported. So they were kind of aware of the ways that their department or school expectations had also shifted over the years from relationships being central and assumed to the culture to being something that might be perceived as kind of a hindrance to other aspects of academic work. So that kind of came up in those focus groups with faculty from higher status. On the kind of other side of the spectrum, faculty in lower status positions expressed uncertainty as related to labor. They asked some questions like, is the work involved in caring for students part of my job? And a lack of kind of guidance and recognition for building and sustaining those relationships was often described with words like that it's invisible or that it's extractive from them. So those are the big takeaways from our focus groups with the faculty. And I'll pass it back to Dorothy to highlight some of the specifics that they share with us about supports and barriers. You're muted, Dorothy.
So in summary of this finding that you're seeing still on the screen is that overall the higher and lower status colleagues wanted to change the culture from one that is currently pitying colleagues, and that's a word they used, who are supporting students to one that recognizes and rewards those contributions. So, you know, there was this perceived culture change that they wanted to undo or center again the importance of relationships. So one other interesting finding was that there was a lot of evidence for the caring for students, welcoming and inviting students. And what we didn't find a lot of evidence for is programs being intentional about helping students explore their sense of purpose in life. When program director spoke about purpose, it was largely in the context of helping students see the purpose of a chosen field. And relatedly, a significant number of program directors and staff had difficulty articulating how their program respected student identities and allowed them to further develop their sense of self. I could say more about that in the interest of time. So barriers that included, that were mentioned, you already heard, is that there might be a misalignment between the current culture and the ever increasing need to care for students in particular ways. We heard about the mental health crisis earlier today, and that people who really are caring about students and are taking the time to listen to them are perceiving that this labor is invisible. Women faculty and faculty of color in particular feel the burden of being sought out by students and spending hours talking with students about their lives, and this is well documented, of course, in the literature. And we need to consider our institutional structures that continue to ignore the pressures that faculty experience on the ground. So specific recommendations that faculty had for centering the importance of relationship, you can move on to the next slide, are elevating the status of the relational work. And many of you have done this by having these university wide initiatives and really communicating visions for your institutions that clearly center around reorienting the culture towards making relationship building and purposeful interactions with students front and center. We also have a need for making this work count. And then by changing promotion and tenure policies, and as well as nurturing and opportunities for faculty as well as director staff to learn from exemplary approaches. And this is the work that we are planning to do as a Center for Teaching Excellence. And there are, of course, clear lessons that need to be communicated to our leadership, who needs to understand the realities on the ground and the changing faculty work, particularly for those faculty who are in teaching intensive positions. And so and this is what we wanted to highlight here for this audience of university administrators. So taking faculty well-being and making that important and really thinking about what we can take off the plate of faculty or putting them into those opportunities that give them time to be the type of mentors that they are squeezing into their already full plates. And really trying to figure out the why that was mentioned earlier today, why this is important for us as an institution. So Tom, if you want to come back to UVA and explain to, re-explain to our leadership why this work matters, please do that. We need help with aligning our realities with our rhetoric.
Thanks, Dorothy.
So, yeah. So in terms of our work moving forward, what we are planning to do is communicating back to the leadership, and Lynn, you can go to the next slide, that our findings and the realities of faculty on the ground, and then creating capacity through some initiatives that really enable people to learn from one another and to learn also from individuals who are already engaged in this work and providing support in learning from their strategies and skills. And then, of course, like everybody else, we want to disseminate our work to the broader educational community. So with that, and in the interest of time that is moving fast, I give it back to Archie. I don't know whether we have time for questions.
We probably have time for one quick question. And again, just remember, we will have an opportunity during the breakout sessions to probe into this information further. But again, Dorothy, Lynn, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. It's really good to see what you all have been able to accomplish there. So any quick thoughts or any quick questions for them? at this point?
I got a quick one. This is Rogan.
Yeah.
Thanks, Archie. And thanks for a terrific overview. Curious, Tom Katsoulias and the UConn team were talking earlier about how in their set of attempt to embed this in university culture, I've also heard you all describe that just now, new administration with a president and senior team really devoted to this as a principle was instrumental. You guys have been through a institutional leadership change kind of across the board of late. Has that been a dynamic for you? Have you found steady support? Could you use more along this particular line of university administrative support?
I was going to let Dorothy take that one.
So, right now, I think with COVID, so we received this grant just as Archie was leaving the institution. And when COVID hit, the university is ever changing its priorities. And certainly we haven't had a time to recommit to this work in ways that are necessary, in our opinion, I really like the UConn presentation in thinking about the unintentional consequences of putting, basically training more faculty to do this individually well, or working with programs that feel stressed and that feel the disconnect of asking faculty to do more work when what they are hearing is that they are already pressured. So I do think that recommitting and making the program directors, the programs feel supported and the faculty feel supported is very central to the work moving forward.
Thanks, makes a lot of sense.
All right. Thank you all again, colleagues at UVA, for a wonderful presentation and for wonderful work. So our last presentation is from Wake Forest University, where their project was looking at understanding the impact of COVID-19 on undergraduate student well-being. So turn it over to you all.
Hello, thank you so much. Give me just a moment here while I get all the buttons pushed. Let's see, it should be this one. Great. So thank you for our time together today. I'm looking forward to speaking with all of you and getting some critical conversation going about the pandemic's impact on student well-being, identity, agency, meaning, and purpose, and how we can possibly intervene. I am fortunate enough to have with me today, out of this impressive group of folks who worked on this project, Tamara McLaughlin, who is going to be keeping an eye on chat for us. Before we dig into the content, I would like to make a few acknowledgements. The first of which is for the land, which has served for centuries as a place for exchange and interaction for Indigenous peoples, specifically Sarikataba, Cherokee, and Lumbee in Wake's current location, and the Shakori, Ino, Sissipaha, and Okinichi in Wake's original location. Funding for this project comes not only from CLTE, but funding for measure development and data collection comes from Reynolds American and Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina. And finally, what we'll see in just a minute is that the project has been around for a number of years now, since 2014, and a lot of people have contributed to this project and brought with them majoritized and minoritized identities that grant privileges and biases of which we are not aware. And so we have no beliefs that we have all the answers or know all the things. So that we can spend as much time as possible today with our findings and our implications for practice, I'm going to move super fast through our methods and our goals. Please feel free to ask questions outside later, and I'm happy to provide more detail. Unlike a lot of the other projects we have been looking at today, ours was a data mining project using existing administrations of Wake's well-being assessment, which I'll explain more in a minute. And our goal was to generate practice informative statistical models that we could bring to expert practitioner audiences like all of you to get some ideas about what can we do moving forward. We have two research questions to review today. First, what about student subjective well-being, identity, agency, meaning, and purpose changed during the pandemic? And what about the associations between all those variables can give us some clues about intervention points? The well-being assessment, as I mentioned already, has been around for a while now. That went through a number of years of development, and we wanted to make sure that the content was relevant to traditionally aged undergraduate students and didn't just reflect the research predominantly written by white middle-aged researchers about what well-being is and what it should look like. And we wanted to make sure that the content in the well-being assessment had evidence for being responsive to intervention and within the scope of the higher education experience. There are a lot of dimensions in the well-being assessment. We are just going to be using the dimensions associated with meaning and purpose, subjective well-being, which is life satisfaction, self-esteem, social anxiety, happiness, anxiety, depression, and loneliness, and identity and agency, for which we don't have full measures. We're extracting some items from meaning and purpose, and we'll see more about what those are in just a minute. Again, we use several administrations of the well-being assessment to create an integrated sample of about 29,000 undergraduate student responses. This is our one method slide. And what I'm going to say here is we used a bunch of R. We did for research question 1, a mountain of ANOVAs with a false discovery rate correction procedure. And for research question 2, we did a whole bunch of path modeling. Here are our results for research question 1. This is just the one-way ANOVAs. What we're looking at is a plot of effect sizes. And I've got translations for what those effect sizes mean down here at the bottom of our screen. Our coral bars are showing us dimensions that declined during the pandemic, and our teal bars are showing us dimensions that increased during the pandemic. I'm just going to draw our attention to our presentation variables today. Subjective well-being, which had sort of a moderate decrease during the pandemic. Meaning, which had sort of a small moving in the direction of moderate decrease. Identity, agency, and purpose. Identity, agency, and purpose all had pretty small decreases. And by way of foreshadowing, I'm going to point out that optimism here had something like a small moving in the direction of moderate decrease. This is a partial result for our path modeling for research question 2. I, who have worked on these models for weeks and made this nutty looking path diagram, even I find this overwhelming. So we are going to work with a simpler version today. The underlying model is the same. It's just depicted in simpler and more presentation friendly way here. And as we go along, I'm going to add paths and explain what all these variables are. In our first edition, we see that students' sense of meaning, their lives feeling matterful every day, doing something meaningful every day, and their self-efficacy around coping with difficult events is associated with subjective well-being, which in turn supports academic outcomes. This is not a single score. This is several different items that measure things like GPA and intent to transfer or drop out of school. Students' academic outcomes are also supported by their sense of purpose, which we measured as feeling like they had goals that they valued for life after graduation. And agency, which we ended up measuring with 2 items in these models, working to define goals and having actionable plans for our goals, was associated with purpose. Identity, which ended up being measured with 3 items, life by feeling like my life matters, I know what I find meaningful, and I have a sense of how I fit in the world. These items were related in different ways to sense of meaning, subjective well-being, and academic outcomes. And finally, over here on the left-hand side, optimism was associated with meaning, coping, and subjective well-being, and optimism here meaning something like, I feel like the future holds good things for me. Now, for those of you who are following along from the first version of this path diagram, where I said, this thing is too big and it's overly complicated, a very good question here is, Nicole, why did you keep optimism? Because that was not part of our CLTE homework assignment. And I ended up keeping it in our model in our conversation today for 2 reasons. One, it ended up in the modeling just being associated with everything. It was a very powerful variable. We ended up trimming some of the paths out, just for the sake of model parsimony, but I was surprised by how pervasive the connections were. And second, because I think it holds a lot of promise for being one of those micro level environmental changes that we can all start making interactions with students and each other on a daily basis that could have a big impact for very little programming costs or money. And what do I mean by this? I'm going to borrow from Martin Seligman's version of learned optimism, his 3 Ps here, where he says that people who have strong levels of optimism tend to treat positive events as permanent, pervasive, and personal. And people who are optimistic also treat negative events the opposite way, as impermanent, isolated, and impersonal. I find this a little abstract to work with, so I've made up an exaggerated example for us to play with a little bit about a midterm conversation. And in our positive formulation of this event, the midterm went great, everybody got an A, and an optimistic framing by our professor might be something like, I'm impressed by how good you students are and how great your study skills are, all your persistence and determination, good for you. A pessimistic interpretation, which would be impermanent, isolated, and impersonal, might sound something like, y'all just got lucky. I'm going to get you next time, right? And we have all been in classrooms that have had these kinds of conversations. In the negative framing of this event, let's say the midterm was a big hot mess and nobody got an A and it was an unexpected disaster. In this case, the pessimistic interpretation is going to be the permanent, pervasive, and personal one, where our professor might say something like, nobody ever listens, I gave you directions, you never study, you never do what I tell you, you're all going to fail, this is a terrible disaster, right? And again, we have all heard versions of this conversation, but an optimistic framing of this event would be something along the lines of, again, impermanent, isolated, and impersonal. Let's chalk this up to COVID, construction, I tried some new test items that weren't working, whatever. And then let's move forward to find some more responsible ways and do better the next time. And what I'd like to point out here, and maybe it's because of my own deep connections to pessimism, coming from a long line of pessimists myself, is that optimism does not have to be toxic positivity, right? There's nothing here that says, hey, you guys did terribly on the midterm. That's great. You're awesome. This is amazing, right? There's none of that going on here. And also, this does a very good job of holding students and faculty member accountable in very specific ways. So counter to optimism, sometimes reputation for being unhelpful or letting people off the hook, it can highlight for us what we need to do moving forward in ways that are very actionable and reasonable and specific. So what I would say again here is that we can use these kinds of optimistic reframings, not just in classrooms. We can use this with students outside of classrooms. We can use this in the way that we talk to ourselves about what we're doing in life and what we have planned for ourselves for that day or the week or the upcoming semester. And very importantly, we can do that with each other. And when we start making cultures out of optimistic reframing and well-being supports in this drop in the bucket every moment kind of way, it becomes an environmental level intervention all of a sudden, rather than I have given you this manual of specific things that you have to do in order to meet this program, or I'm adding another layer of responsibility to the things that you're doing. So my question to all of you, I am not a faculty person, I'm a staff person. So maybe I got this example about our classroom midterm totally wrong. And this is a totally unrealistic suggestion that we start using optimism in this environmental level kind of way. I would love to hear from all of you. How does this sound? Is this feasible? Or are there other points that you're seeing in our connections with the variables that might be more achievable? Or are there things that are sticking out for you? Let me.
So that's great, Nicole. I'd be interested in hearing people's comments. We unfortunately this session is a little shorter because we're running up against the time end of the time for this breakout session. I'm tempted to say, as an optimist, hopeful, glass half full kind of person, I'm tempted to say that yes, this is definitely something that can happen, and I think you can encourage optimism just by being an optimistic person in front of the class. But I'll let others respond as well. Lynn, please.
Oh, thank you for that presentation. Really enjoyed it, even the condensed version. As soon as you said the faculty messaging piece about how they're communicating optimistically, I immediately thought of some work by Kimberly Tanner about the kinds of talk that faculty use in the classroom and trying to collect information about that, and how we know from other ways of how students perceive faculty communications that it does matter. Thinking about the language we use in our syllabus, which is kind of a UVA CTE favorite, but also the in the moment small things that we communicate to our students in teaching. So to answer your question, yes, that's all.
Yeah. Thank you, Lynn. That's great. Others, we have a couple minutes.
I want to go one step further while thanking Nicole, my down the hall neighbor, for a really fabulous update that I hadn't heard yet. We had unscientific and unstructured at the administration level, and now I wish I'd talked to Nicole at the time, but very intensive conversations at the senior administration level about how to convey during the last 18 months some kind of sense of optimism to faculty so that it might trickle through to, well, A, their own lives, and then also to their students. You know, for all kinds of understandable reasons, fear and terror and anxiety reigned. And Nicole will know from having been at Wake across this period, we wound up having 24, I think 23 in the end, all faculty forums, informative, what's happening with COVID. A big part of it was like, the world is not ending. The sky is not falling. We don't have cases on campus. We were, you know, possibly irritatingly, but I hope usefully, relentlessly optimistic. And Nicole, I can't wait to get with you about what we might find. And when we can scrape together the money for our next iteration to see what's happening coming out of COVID, if that's had some effect.
That was my immediate thought, Rogan, that I'd love to see this sort of run again and see what numbers look like, you know, maybe now, a year from now, something like that. I also wonder, Nicole, if you have had a chance or done any stratification along, you know, subgroups or of student populations on campus. So thinking particularly about first generation students, or you know, stratification by race and ethnicity, that sort of thing. I think that might be really interesting to see if the numbers look differently.
Yeah, we ended up with over 2,300 pairs of comparisons across demographic identities. I am still trying to figure out what the patterns are, but we are seeing actually that in some cases, our students who hold minoritized racial identities are some of the most optimistic pre and during the pandemic. And I don't actually know what to make of that, but I would chalk it up as a sign of resilience.
Oh yeah, as a qualitative researcher, I'm like, and that's where your qualitative researcher comes in, right? You know, time to do focus groups and student interviews and dig deeper there for sure. But yeah, is it resilience, or yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I see the birth of a dynamic research duo.